Hey there everyone, I'm Shivani, the Travancore Hub Student Representative of IEEE Pi Kerala section, and I'm thrilled to welcome you to yet another thrilling episode of Voice It. Today, we have the privilege of introducing you to a true visionary in the world of career transformation and professional development, Arjun Prakash, the mastermind behind Pivot Careers. Arjun isn't just an entrepreneur. He is the maestro of helping individuals make seamless career transitions. With a solid background in management consultancy and a degree from NYU, Arjun embarked on a journey that ultimately gave birth to Pivot, your one stop destination for career empowerment. So, buckle up because Arjun's story is pure inspiration for entrepreneurs and career enthusiasts alike. Arjun, welcome aboard. So,
Thank you, Shivani.
yeah. So I guess we can just start diving in with the questions. Can you tell us a little bit about your upbringing and your childhood influences that may have shaped your entrepreneurship mindset?
Yeah, absolutely. I was born and raised in a relatively small town near New Delhi called Meerut. And that's where I was until middle school before I moved to Gurgaon for high school. Um, Meerut is one of those, typical small Indian towns where basically you don't get a lot of, world exposure in the sense in the time when we didn't really have internet. The exposure was very limited to whatever was happening locally within the city. And that was kind of good and bad because good in a way that it helped me focus a lot, right? I was really academically motivated. I was really into playing cricket, so it helped me kind of shine in terms of my core skills, which was academia and cricket. But at the same time, it limited my exposure a bit in terms of knowing what other things I could do outside of just academia and cricket. So that's where I grew up. And in terms of my role models in childhood, from an entrepreneurship standpoint, I think number one, I'll have to say that it was my father. So my father actually, throughout his career, he was an entrepreneur. He started a hospital and other healthcare setups. And until he retired, he worked on those. So it was just so motivating, so inspiring to see him build something from scratch, from the ground up, that that really impacted a lot of people's lives in a positive way. Obviously, he likes to say that his work is one of the most important work there is because it really helps saves people's lives. But what I really learned from him was the work ethic that he brought and how he prioritized his organization, his employees, his clients or customers. That was really, really inspiring. So I would say, yeah, that was probably the number one role model for me growing up.
So you mentioned a bit about how growing up in Meerut, it was a little bit of a constraining environment. So would you say that like your later on education at NYU played a bigger role in shaping your entrepreneurship journey?
Yeah, I think, we are the sum total of all our experiences, right? That's what I like to believe. So it's not necessarily that New York played a bigger role per se, but yes, it played a vital role in helping me become who I am today and in helping me become an entrepreneur for sure. I think one of the things that I realize, and this is specifically for me, it may not apply to everybody who grows up in a small town. I had a relatively subdued personality when I was growing up in Meerut because it was very one track kind of a life. You focus on studies and you focus on cricket, and everything else was just kind of on the back burner because, like I said, those were the two main things I focused on. But like when I moved to even before moving to New York, when I moved to Gurgaon, I was in a boarding school where I came across people from diverse cultures, people who had moved from all parts of India to be at that high school. And that in itself really was initially a culture shock, but more than that, it helped me learn so much about how people do things in a diverse perspective. Like, for example, apart from cricket and academia, I was involved in so many other things. For example, drama and doing yoga, going for debates, international debates that we did with multiple other schools, and variety of activities that I don't think I would have gotten a chance to do in Meerut, right? And then once I moved to New York for my undergrad, I think, yes, for sure, it played a tremendous role in shaping me into who I am today, because the amount of independence that I got in New York, where it was solely my responsibility to craft my future, that really definitely had a huge impact, right? So the amount of independence you get, the amount of self reliance that I got here, that shaped me into a much more confident individual who was ready to start something of his own. Um, so yeah, I mean, I would definitely credit New York for that, instilling that in me.
You have a bit of an unique experience, we can say, because you initially had a job at a management consultancy, and then you left it for entrepreneurship. So were there any moments when you doubted your decision to leave your management consultancy job for entrepreneurship, and how did you overcome those doubts?
That's a very good question. I think that probably is something that a lot of people I come across in helping them in their careers could resonate with, because doubt and confusion are probably the biggest factors in holding people back as to what they should do in their careers and generally in lives, right? So um, I would say 100%. There were moments of doubts as to whether I should leave my cushy jobs in management consulting. And to be honest, if you've looked at my career graph, there's not just one moment, but multiple moments where I made, un uh, conventional decisions, right? Decisions that did not line up with the expected linear career graph that most people have, right? And the number one was actually leaving US or leaving New York to come back to India. That happened in 2018, where I was working with the same consulting firm for about 7 years and had really climbed up the career ladder. I had moved from junior analyst to an associate and then a project manager, and was about to become a partner at the firm. And that's when I pulled the plug from my US firm and US life and moved back to India. And then, like you said, in India, I was leading a vertical for one of the largest management consulting firms called Mercer for about 2 years. And after doing that, I again made the unconventional decision of leaving that role and starting something of my own in a new field, which had nothing to do with management consulting. Right. So definitely when you make such big decisions, right, where you kind of start all over, right, where there is limited certainty of what is going to happen, I think it's inevitable for a person to feel unsure, right? But at the same time, I think there are a lot of moments in life where you can't have all the information or data point, right? You are dependent on uh, just a few factors. And for me, what are these factors? These factors are your priorities in life, right? That is the defining thing of how you make your big decisions. Like, what are your core goals at a given point in time? So for me, at the time I was moving back from US to India, it was actually being, closer to my family, because I had been away from them for more than half my life since I moved to boarding school. Um, and also the fact that India was at the time in 2018 just starting to become the hub for startups and new business ideas that had not been there for a long time. So I could foresee that India would definitely have an inflection point in its growth journey. So because of those two reasons, I realized that I would definitely wanted to be in India, even if I had to give up on the stability of my job that I had in US. And secondly, when I moved from Mercer to starting something of my own in 2020, at that time my priority was again to actually do something on my own that would create a positive impact at the grassroots level in people's lives, right? And I felt very strongly, very passionately about the idea of starting Pivot, which would help people make smoother and successful career transitions. Because the reason I was so motivated to start that is because I had actually come across at least I would say 30 odd people just in my closed network who were trying to make transitions, but were facing difficult times to actually achieve those goals. So I realized that the level of pain that people experience is quite deep at that during those transition junctures. They want to do something else than what they are doing, but are not able to. So that problem and how much I resonated with that problem because of my own transitions in my career is something that really drove me to work on Pivot. So yes, even though there were doubts about stability, about having less pay, not knowing whether I would be successful or not, I still moved to new things because I realized that my biggest priorities were aligned with those new things that I wanted to do in my life.
Yeah. So you told us a little bit about pivot as well as some challenges that you faced when you transitioned from your previous job to entrepreneurship. So maybe you could share with us some challenges or difficulties you faced when you actually were building pivot up. So and then maybe how you overcame those difficulties.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, I think that would be quite helpful for other folks who are trying to build something of their own. So I think the number one challenge that I faced was the fact that I was not from a technical background, right? I didn't have an engineering background or typical startup background, which most entrepreneurs do at the time they start their ventures. I mean, um, obviously, if I started something, let's say that was related to the nature of work I had experience in, like management consulting, talent rewards consulting, I mean, that had been my specialization for over 9 years, right? So I'm sure if I had started something within that field of my own, it would have been relatively easier because I would have had a lot of good contacts in that industry, in that network. I would have also had the benefit of being a specialist and an expert in that industry. But since I started something which was tech driven, right? It's a tech driven platform that we have at Pivot, and the fact that it was helping people in their careers, but in a new way, in a way that I had not focused on in the previous few jobs that I had had. Yeah, so I was just sharing that because I hadn't had that tech knowledge and experience, I think it held me back in terms of moving as fast as I wanted to initially, right? And I think a lot of times when people are starting something new, there are gap areas in your skill set, in your knowledge, in your capabilities, right? And it may not be tech, it may be something else. There might be engineers who are very good at building a tech product, but they don't have the business acumen or marketing experience, right, of how to sell that product, right? So I think the way I at least was able to bridge some of the gaps with regard to my technical background was doing a few different things. Number one is educating myself, right? I don't think when you're an entrepreneur and starting something to build on your own, you can outsource and delegate things, but you cannot just completely give it on to somebody else, right? Where you have no idea of how that thing is done. So I had to embrace the fact that I was a novice in technology. I didn't know much about it, but rather than considering yourself somebody who cannot learn, who cannot grow, you have to have that growth mindset of saying, okay, I'm, let's say, in my late 20s, but I will learn this new skill, right? It's doable. I've learned many new things in my life so far, and no matter how old I get, I will be able to pick up new concepts and skills. So I took certain courses. I read a lot about different tech stacks. um, I also spoke with many engineers at the time to get their objective opinions on the kind of questions I had about technology. So I found different ways of learning more about how to build a tech platform, right? That was number one. The second problem that personally, I don't think I had a very hard time figuring it out, but I had to be very disciplined about it in order to solve it, was creating your own structure, right? So when you are in a corporate life, you work with large teams, or at least you have a solid team to support you, and that brings a lot of structure and support and dependency, right? Like you can um, you can just depend on others to help you make sure that you're working, 9 to 6, 9 to 7 every day and getting things done, by delegating, by collaboration, all of that. But when you're on your own, right, when you're starting something from scratch on your own, you have to be extremely disciplined to make sure that you are going to, keep going every day despite numerous obstacles that are going to come your way. And you don't have many people to depend on. It's primarily you, especially in the beginning, right? So how do you create the structure and support systems in place when you're just starting out is also very, very critical, I would say. And I was able to do that by primarily doing two things. One is, whenever you have to be consistent or disciplined about something, you have to make it very easy for yourself to be able to accomplish those tasks. And how do you make it easy? By limiting distractions in your life, right? So that is number one thing that I focus on. Like I try to make sure that every new day that was there, I didn't think much about whether I was going to, focus on XYZ tasks that I had set for myself. I knew I was going to focus on them, right? So that decision making did not limit me, because a lot of times, for example, let's say if somebody's going to the gym or trying to go to the gym every day, the the thing that limits most people is when they start to think in their mind whether they should go to the gym or not that day, right? But if you stop thinking like that and you just make it like it is a given, the same way that I brush every day, I'm going to go to the gym every day. And same thing applies to entrepreneurship, that I'm going to, no matter what, work on this despite the lack of support or structure, right? I'm just going to keep doing this. So I think that is the kind of mindset that I developed in the early stages that helped me bring a lot of structure. And then in terms of support, I got a lot of good support from my friends and family initially until I started building a team. So that was also very, very helpful in my entrepreneurship journey.
Yeah, so like customers are like the major part of a company, especially for like a tech, startup. So how important was customer feedback in shaping the development of Pivot, and what strategies did you use for gathering those, customer feedback and actually implementing them?
Yeah, I mean, customers are the center of any business, right? The whole purpose that a business exists is to help solve the problem or increase, the utility or the satisfaction of the people you are serving. So I think I was very, very, I have been very customer centric, I would say, throughout, building Pivot. There are many other things I could improve about, being an entrepreneur myself, to be honest. But being customer centric is something that has been one of the core focus for me. And the way I have been able to do it, number one, was very simple: utilizing my own network to connect with those who might be looking for career related support when they're transitioning, right? Lot of times when people start, they don't know where to find prospects or leads for customers, right? So it can be difficult, to be honest, when you're first starting. Like, do you go start doing ads? Do you go on social media and start talking about it? Right? Or do you do something else? Right? Like, for example, if you're a freelancer, you might go to a marketplace, but when you're starting a company, you're not sure where to actually uh, get your first few customers, right? So you have to try different things. Actually, there is this framework called the bullseye framework. I would recommend that to anybody who is starting something of their own and looking to get initial customers. This bullseye framework, it talks about 19 different channels that you can actually source your initial customers, right? And I mean, 19 is a huge number, so it's not that you find people through all those 19 ways. But yes, you have to analyze those channels to see which ones would work best for your business and given the background that you have. So for me, it was actually, I had to start small because it was just me in the beginning. So I didn't need thousands of customers. I just needed maybe even, in the first month, I needed maybe just 5 or 10 customers, right, to start with. And I knew that the easiest way for me to get things rolling was utilizing my own network. And what I did was I basically drafted an email which talked about why I was starting Pivot, what I was going to help people with, and if my network would connect me to those who might be interested in working with me on the career transition, right? That was a very simple thing did. I sent it to maybe about 50, 60 people, out of which maybe half of them responded. And within a week or two, I had about 15, 20 people ready to become my customers. Right. So that's where things really started. I'm just talking about at the time when when Pivot was nothing. It was really just an idea in my head. Um, and then over a period of time, we have developed multiple other channels to source more customers, right? And one of our main channels today is LinkedIn, right? LinkedIn is obviously the biggest professional network, and a lot of people who are looking for career support are on LinkedIn. So, I started creating content on LinkedIn where I talked about what are some of the best ways to make career transitions, talked about stories of other people who have successfully made transitions, or if they failed, then why they failed. So, talking about these things on LinkedIn brought a lot of organic inbound leads to us, right? And it helped us connect with potential customers who then worked with us to accomplish their own career goals, right? So LinkedIn is one, and then there are a couple of other things. So we take feedback from all of our customers, right? I speak with them one on one almost daily. Even after this session, I actually have a couple of sessions lined up with our customers to understand what's working for them, what's not. So that, one-on-one is probably the best way up to get customer feedback. But apart from that, yeah, I mean, there are multiple other things that, marketers can talk about. Like you can do surveys, you can do focus groups, you can put widgets on your website which collect feedback when the user is scrolling through or browsing through your website. There are multiple ways. But for me, the best learnings have come from having very structured conversations and seeing your customers actually use your tech product to understand like how they use it. Are they using it in the manner that you expected them to use it, or are they doing something else with it, right? And seeing those things really helps you understand how to change your product, how to iterate on it, right, and build something that actually solves the problem rather than something that you thought would solve the problem.
Yeah. So earlier you mentioned that LinkedIn was one of the main channels through which you initially sourced your customers, and you're
Mhm.
also a top voice on LinkedIn. So, what advice do you have for professionals looking to establish themselves on a, have a strong online presence and personal brand on, let's say, LinkedIn, for example?
Got it. Yeah, I think whenever you have a large goal, Shivani, my philosophy is to think like an engineer. Okay. Not that I'm an engineer, but since I have now spoken with a lot of engineers and worked with them, what I've realized is, see, when you're building a big tech product, you have to divide that product requirements into smaller requirements. And you divide the teams that are going to work on the smaller requirements. So, in essence, anytime you're working on something big, you have to break it down into smaller tasks that are more achievable. Because if you don't do that, then you will always feel like overwhelmed and unable to actually see a clear vision to accomplish that larger goal. So, if you're thinking about building a strong brand on LinkedIn or any other social media platform, the simplest thing that you can do is go and create a profile for yourself that really talks about your interests, your experiences, your skill sets in a very clear manner, right? That's the easiest thing that somebody can do because you know yourself the best, right? Nobody else. So nobody else can do it for you. You have to go to your LinkedIn profile, and you can do some easy Google search to identify how to improve your LinkedIn profile, right? So I'm not even talking about creating content so far. I'm just talking about uh, setting up a good profile so that when people look at your profile, they get intrigued. They want to speak with you, especially the people who are in that field. So let's say if you're a marketer or a product manager, right? Can you frame your profile in a way which talks about the kind of work experiences you've had, can speak to others rather than just saying, for example, that I am a product manager at Amazon. Can you actually talk about what you have done at Amazon, similar to how you might do it in your resume, but do it in a way which really connects with people. So you don't have to just talk about your accomplishments. I mean, yes, talk about your accomplishments, but also talk about the nature of projects that you've worked with, right? Worked on. And then you have various other sections where your personality, your past experiences can really shine through. So like the about section, the header that you have, right? The LinkedIn banner that you have. These are all great places to provide new insights and information to your audience so they can resonate with the work that you do, right? This can take maybe just like about an hour to set up a good LinkedIn profile, and everybody has the capability, right? Even if you're a student, you can do it. You can talk about the coursework that you have taken or the internships that you have worked in, right? So you don't necessarily need to be a full-time working professional to utilize the power of LinkedIn. Um, that's the basic. But yes, if you want to take your your personal brand or your LinkedIn game to the next level, then you do have to start creating some content, right? So I was a very passive user of LinkedIn until 2021. I only started creating content in 2022. And in the beginning, what I did was actually created very limited content of my own. I mostly just interacted with other creators on LinkedIn, people who were already either not necessarily top voices, but they had strong brands on LinkedIn and they were in my space. So I started commenting and engaging with posts of folks who were talking about career transitions or job search or upskilling or networking, right? All of these things, which are part of my core areas of interest, is where I started, kind of like hanging out. It's the same thing, right? Like, let's say you're in college and there are multiple groups or what do you call, like those societies in college, right, which are divided based on interest. So you have to understand which one you're interested in, and you start hanging out, you become members of those groups, right, so that you can come across other people and learn from them. Start doing the same thing on LinkedIn. So before you actually start creating your own content, just start hanging out with the people virtually and understand what they are doing, what's working for them in terms of their content, right? And slowly that way you will start contributing to the community on LinkedIn. So people will appreciate the fact that you're engaging with their content, right? You will also get support from them when you start creating your own content, right? And ultimately, I would say whenever you are doing any sort of personal branding and networking, yes, it's personal, but the only way you build a personal brand is when others start appreciating the insights or the value that you bring to the table, right? A personal brand is not created in vacuum. It's created, based on how the community interacts with you. So it's very important to give and take, right? You can't just create content and expect people to come to you when you don't engage with them or become part of the larger community. So yeah, I mean, it's a slightly long-winded answer, but I would say create your own profile in a very clear manner so that others can resonate with it. And number two, um, just engage with other folks who have common interests as you and learn from them and then start creating your own content.
Yeah, so that was really good advice. I think I'm going to implement those in my own LinkedIn page after this interview ends. So, coming back to Pivot, how do you see like the future of career tech industry evolving, and how is Pivot positioned to adapt to those changes?
Oh, wow. I don't think I've ever been asked that question before, not even by venture capital investors. They should be asking these kind of questions. Very good question, Shivani. I would say, see, firstly, the term career tech that you talked about, there are hardly any people talking about it, to be very honest. It's like, for example, edtech in 2010s, right? Nobody was really talking about edtech in 2010s. It's only after Coursera, Udemy, and edX came along in 2011, 2012. That's when edtech really became a thing. And then in India, it only came up in the last 5, 6 years because of the pandemic primarily, right? Like Byju's and Unacademy, Vedantu, and all these. companies, right? So if you look at certain new sectors, right, they are very limited in terms of their exposure. Like very few people talk about it or know about it until they actually become big because of a few companies that take the game to the next level, right? So career tech today, I would say, is where edtech was maybe 10-15 years back, right? What that means is there is tremendous scope for the career tech industry to grow. So currently, let's say in India, the career tech industry might be about $1.5 to $2 billion market size. It has the potential to exceed $10 billion by the end of this decade, right? Um, so I think firstly, let's define career tech quickly. So career tech is different from ed tech because ed tech is all about upskilling people, right? It's basically providing coursework online so that people can study online and get very personalized learning pathways, right? Those are the two main things for ed tech that they solve for. Number one, you don't have to be physically present in the classroom to gain new knowledge, and number two, you don't have to learn in the same way that every other individual does. You can learn in your own way. So do um, quizzes, homework, exercises that actually help you. Now, those are the two things that edtech really helps with. How is career tech different? Career tech basically doesn't necessarily focus only on upskilling, right? Career tech focuses on helping people accomplish any career goal that they might have set for themselves. What does that mean? That means it could be upskilling and growth, right? But it could also mean just landing a job without necessarily upskilling, right? Landing your dream role or your target job. It could also mean growing your network and growing your personal brand, like you talked about in your last question, right? It could also mean just getting more clarity with regard to what to do in your career, right? And it could mean all of those things combined together. So, career tech is actually a much larger scope of industry than just ed tech, I would say, right? And the reason it's just starting out is because we haven't seen many companies who focus on solving all of these problems. So that is what our core focus is. How do we help people navigate these difficult junctures in their career when they are unsure of how to how to think about what they should do next, right? A lot of people are confused whether they should, for example, continue in their current industry, change their industry, start something of their own, perhaps move abroad for higher studies, right? There's so many different decisions you can take. So cut through the clutter and make informed decisions. That's the starting point. But like I said, there are many other things that we are solving for. And I think for Pivot, like you asked about how we should think about adapting as the industry evolves. Yeah, very good question. I think for now we are just setting up the fundamentals, right? Because it's a new sector, it's a sunrise sector. So you just have to work on the building blocks of that. You can't distract yourself too much by trying to solve every single problem and thinking about the future and all those things. But yes, you should be prepared for the future by thinking about, okay, what do you expect people to do more and more as time goes by, right? Like, for example, the edtech industry predicted that more and more people are going to actually study online instead of offline in classes, right? That was their main bet that they were making. Our bet is that more and more people are going to go uh, through career changes where they are not staying within one field. They're actually having multiple careers at the same time or during different times, right? So this is actually what I say. The future of careers is personalized, right? Where it's not just one size fits all. So you just keep doing whatever everybody else is doing. It's autonomous, where it's more self-dependent rather than company dependent, right? And finally, it's multifaceted. Multifaceted in the sense that you could have portfolio of careers at the same time. So it's not just like Shivani is just going to be an engineer throughout her life. Shivani can be an engineer, but at the same time, she can be a content creator on LinkedIn or Instagram. And at the same time, she can be a coach where she helps other engineers become better professionals in their lives, right? So that's the future that we think will happen.
Okay. And I kind of already see that future happening. Like my friends are already talking about, working multiple jobs in the when they actually graduate. And also I really do see career tech as a booming industry in the coming years. So like you mentioned that Pivot was just setting up its foundation blocks for a booming like industry that is coming up. So do you actually
Mhm.
define success for yourself and Pivot as a, company?
Sorry, can you just repeat the last bit again?
Yeah, so I was just saying, like, Pivot, you just mentioned that Pivot was just, setting up the foundation blocks for this, coming up
Mhm.
industry. So, do you actually define success for yourself and Pivot careers as a company?
How do we define success?
Yeah,
Basically,
like,
that's the question.
do you define yourself and how do you define it if you do?
Got it. Yeah, I think that's very critical. One thing that I learned in consulting, and it was primarily talent and HR related consulting, right, is every organization, every team, and every individual needs to define success for themselves. Otherwise, if you don't do that, either you will have no definition and you're just going to be confused about what are you really trying to achieve, or somebody else will define it for you. And neither of those things are good, right? So it's very important to define success for yourself. So for us, I think the number one thing that matters most to Pivot is making sure that our product actually solves the core problem that we are focusing on for our users, right? And there are multiple ways to define that success metric, right? Like you have a bunch of KPIs, key performance indicators that you can focus on to understand whether people are actually benefiting from the solutions that you're providing or not, right? So one of the main things that we look at is, are people actually being able to achieve their career goals when they come to us? So our number one goal is to help other people land their target role, right? So when they come to us, they have primarily one goal: can I move into a better role than what I am currently, right? And our main focus is to make sure that happens. So for us, the number one North Star metric, as we call it, as we call it internally, is whether people are landing their target roles. But to achieve that, right, we need to do multiple other things to get that right, right? You can't just focus on the end goal because that's not always a controllable outcome, right? Uh, you have to focus on the controllable factors. For example, India won against Pakistan yesterday. Obviously, the end goal was to win against Pakistan, right? But if the entire team just focused on winning and not actually on, okay, how do we, bowl out this batsman whose weakness is XYZ, all of those, nitty gritty factors, if they didn't take it into account, it would have been very hard to win. So for us, there are these sub metrics or, activities that we do at a ground level. For example, making sure that we are targeting on the right kind of customer, because we can't help every single person land their target role, at least for now, right? We have focused on certain fields, certain industries. So making sure that we are focusing on the right customer, getting feedback, incorporating that feedback, and then making sure that they're landing their target role, that's how we define success for ourselves.
So
Yeah.
earlier on, you shared like your coach and your father were the main like in the your inspiration for your in your earlier part of life. But like, what
Mhm.
was that one piece of advice that you have received, and how has it influenced you, in your journey as an entrepreneur?
There's so many things, honestly, that people will tell you throughout your lives, and they all come at it with good intentions, right? Most people are actually your well wishers and they're trying to help you. But you need to know from an early stage that even though you will have many well wishers in your parents, your mentors, your friends, colleagues, etc., they all are not you. They don't know actually what will ultimately make you successful. They all have had different experiences, so they will share their experience and based on that perspective on what you should do in life. But the biggest advice or learning for me that I imbibed during multiple phases of my life was that you need to have very strong filters internally to parse out what is good advice and what is not good advice for you, right? You can't just blindly follow an influential person who says that this is what worked for me, so it will work for everybody else, right? Firstly, most people who are influential or who are successful will not give you that advice that this is what worked for me, so you should also do this, right? Because your context is different, your background is different, your goals are different, right? um, so you need to become very good at having that judgment of knowing that this advice actually applies to me and I should take it, versus something which I should either not take it or perhaps apply at a different phase in my life when I am, in a similar phase as the person who gave me that advice, right? I hope that makes sense. It's a little meta, right? You asked me about advice and I gave you an advice about how to take advice. So it's a little meta in that sense, but to me it's very, very important that I don't just blindly follow what others tell me. Have your internal filters and judgment be the final decision maker of what you really should do in your life.
Yeah. So I guess with that we can wind up today's enlightening episode of Voice It, if you may. So thank you everyone for joining us today on this episode of Voice It. We have the incredible privilege of hearing from Arjun Prakash, the driving force behind Pivot Careers. Arjun's journey from management consulting to entrepreneurship is nothing sort of inspirational, and his insights have been both insightful and invaluable. So, as we wrap up today's session, I want to extend our heartfelt gratitude to Arjun for sharing his experiences, wisdom, and vision with us. It's clear that he is not just an entrepreneur, but a mentor, a visionary, and empowering individuals on their career paths. We hope that you have found this episode as enlightening as we have, and you'll take Arjun's advice on personal branding, entrepreneurship, and career development to heart. So, thank you, everyone.